Hello, Jane Considine here. It is 7:30. I'm excited. You're excited. I like the way we've got two camps on the go of people who drop in here. We've got the people who see it as a chance for self-care, face masks, nails, pastel stationery, and the people who are getting drunk. Now, I probably wasn't setting a very good example yesterday, and I'd hope you think that my awful spelling yesterday was to do with me being inebriated, but that's not correct. I'm fairly atrocious sober as well, but with the help of knock things into shape. Now, who are these sessions for? Well, they are for teachers. This is our chance to be grown up, just us, to be a bit jargonistic, teacherly, to come together actually and chat teaching and learning. Just so you know, the gentleman on, got things falling off left, right and centre here. The gentleman on the chat is Ian, and I've married him, but I just wanted to say about Ian, he is a teacher. You can get quite jargonistic with him, you can use teacherly terms. He does understand schools and classrooms, so anything you want to hit him up with, do it. And at certain points in this session, he's also going to ask me some questions. So, you guys are the CPD seekers, you are the lockdown learners, and I wanted just to explain my jumper I'm wearing actually, because some of you know this, some of you don't know this. I've got 4 children. One of them has left home, but we've got 4 altogether. Last time I counted anyway. And this is my youngest son's jumper, Oscar. Now, when I named Oscar, a lot of people said I've got a dog called Oscar, and that was very kind of them, I suppose, and I have a child called Oscar. Now, this, I would never have bought it myself, but it caught my eye on the floor of his bedroom today because it's got the word, I don't know if you can see this, I'm going to stand up for a moment, it's got the word squad on it. Now, when you're in teaching, and you spend your whole life in schools, it is very tricky to have a social life. And so school really does become our social life. And when school closures have happened and some of us have lost our links and connections with our teacher friends, I think this feels like a little lovely squad, a hashtag teacher squad. And I got a little bit choked up last night about the loyal attendees and how wonderful you are and how I'm getting to know you beyond just your snack choices, your little sense of humours and all the rest of it. So this is our teacher squad place, and I can honestly say I'm feeling squad goals. A particular shout out to Kevin O'Brien actually, and Kevin, I want to send you, so get in touch with your address please, Right Stuff, for being the most sober in the chat last night. Ian informed me you were completely straight as a die while others were losing it. You were professional and on point, so thank you Kevin. I want to send you a Right Stuff for professional behaviour. And Miss Lancaster, it's a beauty salon where you are, face mask, the whole thing, the pamper sesh, and I'm going to send you Hooked on Books. So please can you send me your address? Citing stuff. Right, It is Friday. This is a great session to finish on. If you want to talk about it on Facebook or Twitter, it's hashtag the Right Stuff Sessions. And this session is all about that third zone of writing. That zone actually where children can begin to twinkle and get their writing to, and that's why they're called the boomtastics actually, to get their writing to boom and explode off the page. And we're going to have a little go. Oh, Ian, are you moving cameras?
Yes.
Oh, be a good boy now. Do you know, we've been happily married for 25 years. You don't want to ruin it now, live.
Sit back, you moved your whiteboard.
I've moved my whiteboard. Yes, I'm a bit fidgety tonight. Okay, so we are now going to be talking about the techniques of writing. These are the devices. These is kind of all the figurative language, the poetic aspects of writing. And in BFG by Roald Dahl, he talks about, well, the BFG talks about it's really important that we don't gobble funk around with words. But let me tell you, tonight we will be gobbling and we will be funking. We'll be doing a lot of gobble funking tonight with words. And as I talk about the booms, it is worth saying they are broadly, it's not a science, but they are broadly hierarchical. There are 9 of them. And we kind of move from the easier stuff up to the more challenging stuff. And that's what we're going to explore. Now, I'm going to give you a little flavour of the booms, what they might be in story, what they might be in non-fiction. A lot of people... Oh, my mic, is it? Oh, have I plugged myself in properly? Twist you. Have I got my mic on?
Yeah.
I don't think I've pressed my button, have I? Oh, it's highly slick here and very... I know you want him on camera. I know this is just a ploy to see him. I'm afraid... It's on red now.
This is what happens when you don't.
Yeah. This is like, Norman Collier. Can you hear me now? Is it crackling? Can you hear me? Well, it's the chat lets us know. What do you reckon, Mr. C? Any good? Bit better? Yeah?
Judy thinks I've got a nice clean...
Oh, well, if it's all going to go awry, it's Friday. Do you know what I mean? Right. The boomtastics. The chance for children and for us to showcase through our demonstration writing to get the writing to explode off the page. And I was just saying there, I'm going to give you some examples for story and non-fiction. And a lot of times we think there's not going to be a lot of examples of these kind of poetic devices in non-fiction. But when you, particularly modern non-fiction, let me tell you, modern non-fiction is drenched in poetic devices. We just need to be on the lookout for it. Okay, so just so you know what's going on, I'm going to tune you into the visual symbol for each boomtastic. This is onomatopoeia. That's a bit of a mouthful. And this is, kids meet this from the youngest of ages. And, our hearts go out to Michael Rosen at the moment, but we're going on a bear hunt. Swishy, swashy, squelch, squirch. All of their early picture books are drenched in... Do you want me to move my mic, Ian?
Yeah.
He's actually doing lip reading. I'm just so rubbish at lip reading. What I'm going to do, should I do that and see if I can clip... I can see. Blind as a bat. You see, I did have my glasses on Monday. Does that work? Is that a bit better?
Still crackling.
Still crackling.
We'll know in a minute. I can't hear, but...
Yeah. Should we try have a go at that? Oh, tech. Do you know what I mean? Tech schmeck. Right, so... Onomatopoeia the sort of thing you might see in non-fiction is this sort of thing. The economy has crashed. The world markets have screeched to a halt. The virus has thumped the guts out of Wall Street. So that actually the sounds coming through there in the words. Now, we've been having this idea build over time, haven't we, about story and trying to get children not just to focus their writing at these sequence points. That actually what we're trying to do is teach English more like maths. We're trying to get them to think about taking a central character through the writing, and as they push Little Red Riding Hood through the writing, we're asking ourselves, is it a high or low for Little Red Riding Hood? So here's, although that's a permanent marker, I'm just going to get rid of that because that's a disaster waiting to happen, as is that. It's the dry white one. How's me mic going, Mr. C?
Not good. I'm going to switch to the camera mic.
We're going to switch to a camera mic. Sounds horrific. Oh,
so you're going to speak up?
Yeah, I'll speak up. We'll switch to camera mic. I hope that's a little bit. I'll take that off then. I can do theatre projection. Yeah, I was one of the backing dancers at the Hippodrome because I could tap dance when I was younger. But I was told very deliberately to just mouth the words and sing quietly. So, but I can, before I had to shut up, I did know how to project. But they obviously thought I was a little bit too brummy. I don't know. I'm scared. No, I'm scared, Mr. C. I'm scared that my bits might flap out. Oh, do I have to take? Can I just do that?
Yeah.
Do you want the mic?
Twist it. You're going to make it worse.
I'm getting told off now. Look. Do you need this now?
No, give that to me.
Right. Cool. Right. What we're going to try and do now is think. Well, actually, if we're going to build something positive with onomatopoeia, that we're going to start with these really positive sounds. We could start with the sounds of buzz, tweet, chirp, so that we can feel all of that positivity coming through. Positive onomatopoeia, the sounds, don't do a capital, Mrs. C, the sounds of spring were everywhere. Brilliant. And what we're trying to build here is that when we're working on a plot point, that we're trying to drive to either positive or negative intent. Now, the next boom on the list is alliteration. And of course, in terms of non-fiction, that often is showcased in things like headlines. So if we imagine we've got the fairy tale times and we're writing all the stories for the goodies and baddies of a fairy tale world, someone like Goldilocks, she breaks and enters, she steals, she vandalises, she thinks it's okay to squat actually, and the only thing probably that would make Goldilocks naughtier, of course, is if she was wearing, red lingerie or something. But there's some quite naughty characters out there in fairy tale world. But this sort of thing, this is what headlines are often doing. Bear's breakfast bagged by blonde. This might be better as blagged by blonde, but either of those work. So we see alliteration in non-fiction. If we were going to use something like alliteration in story, I just want to give you an example now of what we're trying to do with children is if we were on the second plot point of Little Red Riding Hood, and we were going to build something with negative intent, we could do that using alliteration as well. So here, you'll all remember my excellent scale drawn wolf there. But this sort of thing, and for me, with her thinking she's not sure what she's seen, thinking of a word like shadowy, and then trying to build the ideas round that sort of sound at the beginning. So shaken, shadow or shadowy, shy, shape. A few ideas there to get me going. So a shaky shadow, shifted in the foliage. Full stop. She shivered. I think it's really interesting that if you just have two words that are alliterative, it's just seen as an author accident. And before we can say that has been done deliberately, if we're studying, language at degree level, we need to have 3 or more nearby to argue it is alliteration. When we're teaching all of this sort of sound dominance, once kids have got alliteration and they're in year 5 and 6, the next thing you want to build onto that is assonance. Mr. C, am I cracking and crinkling?
You are, I think there is cracking happening.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's anything to do with the mics. I think it might be the connection.
Oh.
So.
I tell you why we might have a bad connection.
Why?
Because Oscar is 14, without a jumper on, squad goals, probably playing a fork knife. I reckon. Do you know what I mean? Kids, who'd have them? Who'd have them? Yeah, I think this could be, and we live somewhere where we don't really have very good broadband speed. So if somebody's trying to Google while somebody else is on fork knife, you know what I mean? The lag that can happen is very, very high.
I've got a couple of questions for you.
Is it about somebody who wants to babysit Oscar for us? No.
Right.
Go on then, hit me up with a question. Nice and loud, Mr. C.
This is from Emma Stitch, and she says, how do you feel about creating non-fiction writing from fiction texts?
Oh, how do I feel about that? I'm going to deal with that in the non-fiction section. I am reasonably cool with that. So we're reading Letters from a Lighthouse by Emma Carroll, and while we are getting really excited about that novel, we're also going to write a diary, we're also going to write a letter. I think that's absolutely fine because that's the links, joins and connections of the primary curriculum. However, I am going to talk about this on the non-fiction section. We've got to be mindful that there are many different modes of non-fiction. Sometimes the integrity of the non-fiction, we just have to write a damn good newspaper report now because Greta is at the UN now and it's happening now in real time, and regardless of our war topic, we have to go and respond to what's happening in the world. So I think a little danger, high voltage sounds too hyperbole, to be honest. But I do think we have to be a bit careful that for the sake of a link, we don't just, but so many things are worth it and good enough and going to be amazing. So I think it's a bit of a judgment call. I feel most sorry for year 3 teachers because they have got topics like rocks and soils from science, and that kind of sometimes can mean, and I don't want to mud the waters here, but it can sometimes mean that then you go and do you know, you've got a lot of non-fiction, like a non-chronological report on rocks and soils, and you sometimes have to have a little word with yourself in a stock cupboard. You know, is that the most exciting non-fiction that we can be writing? So I think we just got to have a nice balance of non-fiction with integrity, the modern kind of humorous non-fiction like the Room 101 blog, as well as the we need to respond now. You know, nobody has got coronavirus on their curriculum yet, but we will have, I hope, because that is going to be so relevant, you know, real and relevant. You know, you've got to remember the national curriculum has moved through so many evolving positions, from broad and balance, you know, real and relevant, and now this mode, knowledge is power. And in that sense, kids, you know, I think non-fiction, we've got to kind of preserve it as a place where we really do damn good research and build their knowledge. Because if you're not careful, you can keep doing creative non-fictions, and it's kind of a missed opportunity to do some real nitty gritty knowledge building. Okay, Carl, that ended up being quite a deep and meaningful, Ian.
Yeah.
Thank you, Miss Stitch. Right, okay, so there we were just looking at taking the plunge down into the negative zone and using alliteration to get us there. Now, I've got a few little cards that I chucked on the floor earlier, but these, we call these sentence maker kits, and these are really helpful. You know, we've been talking a lot about sentence scaffolds, you know, so we have one here, and these are handy, so we can say, look, this sentence won't help you in the sense that it's about reindeers, but the structure could help you. That structure you can mimic as you write your own. So this says, the reindeer rose rapidly and reached upwards into the mysterious magical midnight. But actually we could apply that structure into Little Red Riding Hood, and that collection of you know, sentence maker kits give kids examples, instant sentence scaffolds that they can lean on. Okay, did I mention there was a sale? There was never a good time to buy, but now with 25% off on the Training Space website. Yeah, hard sell. Right, repetition. Now, oh no, actually I've jumped the gun. Before we do repetition, the next one is rhyme. And I don't mean like the rhyming couplet in Gruffalo, but of course kids will meet that rhyming couplet structure. Where rhyme can really be interesting is that sort of reader loudness, that connectivity, because we don't always notice it. And I was reading a sentence in The Guardian today, and it just had high stickability. And the reason why it had high stickability is it just had this like internal rhyme structure. The research community is fast learning about immunity. Now, that hasn't been particularly done for the device of interesting, enticing, particularly when you read it aloud, because of community and immunity. Now,
Right, give me your microphone as well.
are we back? I think we're back. I don't know what happened.
We did.
I became a spinning wheel. I'm so sorry. I hope you can hear me. Brilliant. Okay, we're back in the game. And we were just talking about, weren't we, plot point 3 and whether we could build some alliteration. So we're looking at her basket. We could build in around kind of some things that are happening with her basket. Could we build some similar sounds that could get us into a rhyme? Now, we talked yesterday about bluebells being in the basket, and then we'd probably have to think, well, actually, what rhymes with bells? I don't know if we're going to get much mileage out of this, but if we're thinking about, we could have spells, but I think we're going to have to reject that for being irrelevant. But actually something like smells might work. So if we're building rhyme, we could hear, well, we could make it that it's not very nice, and it's there's some the snacks we're bringing grandma, you know, aren't smelling very good in the sunshine, but I don't think that's very fair. Actually, I think we're going to keep it positive up here. Aromas wafted from the basket, comma, savoury smells and fragrant bluebells. And fragrant, oh, here we go, spelling stress. Fragrant bluebells, look it up, miss. Fragrant bluebells.
Try to spell.
It's all right, done it. Right, so that is rarely used. We see it a lot in things like Julia Donaldson's writing with Gruffalo, kind of that end rhyming, matchy couplet idea. But it's taking it that bit further and noticing writers like Michael Morpurgo and J.K. Rowling who gently put that internal rhyme within sentences. Really interesting. Not always noticed, quite subtle, but has high stickability in the writing. Okay, this fourth zone, we are well familiar with this as teachers. Repetition for effect, the power of three, grouping things together that are kind of the same three types. I want to make a rep actually for a free unit we've got on the Training Space website that's all about persuasive letter writing. And in there we've got a model where what you would call, you know, a Goldilocks model, you know, just right for year 5 and year 6 children, you know, and we're writing to persuade David Walliams into school to promote reading as an author. And then the kids are asked, we model one to Lauren Child, and they're asked then down the line in their independent writing to write one to their favourite author. And there are many locked in that free unit, techniques and devices like the power of three and repetition for effect. And you know, that other idea where, and this is a bit more of a story device, but I just wanted to, in terms of story, there are some writers, you'll begin to see this, who have sentences that begin and end chapters, that sort of full circle idea. Or, you know, Philip Pullman does this sometimes, how a story opens and closes mirrors each other. Or kind of verbs, you know, ending in ing, starting sentences, twirling, twisting, turning, the leaves signal to change. And that repetition for effect can have so many forms. One of my favourites is in Big Friendly Giant. Sophie saw something strange, full stop. I call that, let me explain what I mean. It's like it's a gorgeous, what I would call a step sentence. Sophie saw something strange, full stop. So it had had this sort of structure. Sophie saw something strange. Sophie saw something strange and tall. And you can see there how Roald Dahl adds a little bit more on strange and tall. And then Sophie saw something strange and tall and walking down the street. And it's almost got that movement to it. Have a base sentence, add something on, and walking down the street. Now, that structure I stole blatantly, and some of you don't know that I have got children's picture books. They are a technical, well, I don't know if technical's the right word, but they're an out-and-out failure, to be honest. We don't sell many, but in this book, The Last Straw, this wonderful moment here where Sophie is in hospital and she sees something in the distance. And you can see here how we have this stolen Roald Dahl structure. Then she saw it in the distance. It was something old. It was something old and dishevelled. It was something very old and very dishevelled and very happy to see her. Now, kids love replicating that structure because they can see it in the BFG and they can see this is kind of the teacher territory. To say,
keep going.
Okay, can they hear me
As
though?
far as this is concerned, you're running, so
Yeah.
kind of buffering again.
I'm buffering. Hello. I don't know if I'm buffering. I don't know if I'm in the game.
Okay, you're in.
I mean, I might need to actually. I mean, if we weren't self-isolating, I'd just move into somebody else's house who's got better internet. Oh well. We say it all the time, don't we, as teachers? Isn't tech wonderful when it works? Okay, simile. I hope you've all listened to the Word of Mouth programme on Radio 4 with Michael Rosen, where he talks about figurative language. And if you've not listened to that, it really is worth a listen. And they talk there about how a simile is actually a metaphor with the scaffolding still in place. Now, not only do we teach kids the power of building similes with like and as, but there are many different ways that we can begin to get ideas about simile. And this here, you know, if we're going to build something negative, a story, and I actually, at the moment, the news is full of similes, would you believe? Because actually, at a time of sort of such chaos, there is a lot of language of simile in online news reporting. So that is actually worth looking out for and gathering at the moment. But here, what is worth talking about is, you know, Grandma's bed was as messy as a wolf's den, that cubs had been fighting in. And to support children's simile and metaphor writing, one of the things we've got to try and teach them is when they look to make those comparisons, we want them to try and stretch their thinking not so far away from the plot content. So you can see here that we've already got a wolf in the story. So it's that if sometimes the leaps are too far, then that's when similes and metaphors can jar. So it's trying to give them ideas that are within the content realm that they're working on. And this is kind of a very clever way of working. It's a bit like the bombs in Emma Carroll's book, Letters from a Lighthouse, where they talk about, you know, childhood in that time and, you know, children collecting all their coins in jars, and that a bit later on that thought comes back as they talk. She talks about bombs falling like pennies from the jar. So we get it in its practical sense early on in the story, but it comes back later as a simile, kind of to make a link across the work. And kids need help with that, because sometimes their leaps are too far, and it's nice if they can think about, well, what is already nearby. So when we're building similes and metaphors for Little Red Riding Hood, we are thinking about things like trees, you know, wolves, that sort of thing. You know, when we're building similes and metaphors in Goldilocks, we're thinking of things like bears, porridge, so that actually it's kind of more, it's a cleverer way of taking control of kind of the content links and the cohesion links within the writing. We're going to talk more about that in our final session, when we really go deep and look closely at what makes a greater depth writer. Okay, with that in mind, when we get to metaphor, which is a little bit more challenging again, where we actually take the scaffolding down, one of the ways that we can
Buffering again.
Pardon?
Buffering.
Buffering.
Yeah, just remember where you were. Okay, you're back on.
I'm back on. I'm sorry for buffering on you tonight. And any of you who've got an Apple Mac, you know, it's your worst nightmare. You know, you see the kaleidoscope wheel of doom. I'm sorry that I'm doing all of that. Anyway, Mauritius. I will never forget the most impressive piece of writing I saw by a Year 6 child who was selling, in a holiday brochure, they were selling Mauritius. And they opened with the line, Mauritius is the pearl of the Indian Ocean. And once that was landed, Mauritius is the pearl of the Indian Ocean, why it was so jaw-droppingly amazing was this child had really thought about almost dragging this semantic thread of meaning through the writing. And I wanted to know if she had been taught this, or did she just know this instinctively because she was a reader. I ended up interviewing this girl, and she knew it instinctively because she was a reader. It's so interesting. But so what she'd done, once she'd landed Mauritius is the pearl of the Indian Ocean, she'd gathered a whole range, you know, whether she was doing this kind of, you know, I don't even know if she did a mind map, but it was this sort of idea. You know, if you've got pearl, you've got emerald, you've got ruby, you've got types of jewellery, you've got necklace, you've got ring, you've got bracelet, you've got jewellery, adjectives like shimmering, glimmering, and I don't have the piece of work exactly, but I'm just going to read you the gist of the sort of thing she was able to do. Mauritius is the pearl of the Indian Ocean. The coastline is edged with a necklace of cliffs that surround the emerald sparkling sea. The richness and preciousness of the southern Indian island is locked like a pendant waiting to be discovered. Tranquil by day, the shimmering sands of the beaches both entice and mesmerise. Dazzling by night, the seafront comes to life with captivating light shows and music. A jewel in the crown of the marketplace is the coming together of old and new stalls that present a glittering collection of local food, arts and gifts. Mauritius will charm its way into your heart as a personal treasure gem that delivers both luxury and a wealth of experiences. And that is such a high order way of writing, that establishing of a metaphor, but then not dropping it, not dumping it, not having it as standalone, but having it as an extended metaphor, a semantic thread, you know, a bit like the analogy of the pink lettering through a stick of rock. You know, it doesn't go away, we can always feel it, and that very kind of high order sense of cohesion, that is really exciting. What that might mean in something like story, you know, where we're now trying to shift the tone, you know, it's feeling a little bit more negative. I don't think Little Red Riding Hood's quite cottoned on, it's the wolf, but she's starting to eye her up a little bit more closely. But what we can do now is begin to give clues that this is the wolf by linking to kind of the concept of a wolf, and something like the moon and that image of wolves howling under moons being a way now that we can, and we know in this story of course we've got what big eyes you've got, Grandma, so we could perhaps lean on that. Grandma's eyes were mad moons, and Little Red Riding Hood looked at the lunacy. I wanted something to do with craters now, but it probably will sound, I don't really know how to finish that now I've started. I like this idea of, you know, the lunatic idea, and she's starting to be suspicious. Looked at the craters of lunacy around her, wrinkles.
Crow's feet.
Pardon, Mr. C?
Crow's feet.
Crow's feet, yes. At the crow, yeah, maybe that's it. Oh, something, yeah, let's have, that's better. Crow's feet. Looked at the crow's feet craters. Looked, and Little Red Riding looked closely at the her crow's feet craters. Yeah, kind of tying those two, extending further the moon metaphor.
I've got good
wow.
question
Yeah, good question. Hit me up, Mr. C. I hope I'm not buffering.
How would differentiation play a part in this structure?
A quick answer to your question is scaffolding alone is a form of differentiation, and modelled writing is a form of differentiation, And when we look at the science of teaching and learning, all the latest work around teaching and learning is about the power of strong, dynamic, whole class teaching. However, of course, we are going to have some kids who can really cope and can fly off, and some kids who it's our job to get them there. What I would say is this: when I want to teach metaphor, all kids are going to do metaphor. And a bit later, when we talk about the lesson, I'm going to talk very closely about we're all going to do metaphor, and you're going to learn metaphor, and if you are a bright, quick writer, you're also going to be trained to deepen the moment. And if you're a child who needs support, then we're going to put support to get you there, so that you can be a strong, dynamic, whole class teacher. The last thing you want to do in the teaching of writing is they'll do a simile, they'll do a metaphor. Everybody does the same, but it's our job to help you get there. And then the kids who want to and can, and later I will explain exactly the sort of thing I mean, how we can support kids, and through a device called Deepen the Moment, we can get our really bright, high-attaining writers to show us what they can do. Okay, thank you for that question, Mr. C. Pathetic fallacy. Now, I love this. The kids love it. It's Disney, it's Pixar, they get it. And this is where there is a mirroring to how characters feel, and we begin to see it in nature and weather. Yes, Mr. C, is that another little rustle for a question?
Yeah.
Go on then.
Just quickly, I thought it might be quite a good idea, because our Gil
Yeah.
has just asked what is deepening the moment. Are you going to cover it later in the
I'm
later
definitely
session?
going to cover Deepen the Moment later. Mr. C, you might be able to help me with this. If you can tell me what number session is called the lesson session, that is the session that I'm going to talk about what Deepen the Moment is, what it means, and we're going to explore that in a lot of detail. If I start chuntering on about it now, then we're going to lose our way.
So the writing lesson is on Thursday evening, but then you've got that's followed by the greater depth writer, because I presume there's a bit of them sort of diving in together.
Yeah. So can you remind me of those two numbers? So
Thursday and Friday. So the writing
Thursday and Friday next week, the lesson and the greater depth writer, but mainly the lesson. We're going to be talking about what it means when I say deepen the moment.
And I'll take it you'll be discussing that in independent writing and editing as well, won't you?
Yeah, to a degree. Okay, so stay tuned, and I will definitely define that. Okay, pathetic fallacy, where we get this mirroring from how characters are feeling, whether they're feeling positive or negative, and we can feel it in the environment. It's definitely in the figurative language family, and it's probably the best example of it in the world is in the book The Book Thief, where we have a central character in that book, a child who kicks off at school, and every time she kicks off at school there's this sort of dark, malevolent storm that happens outside, and by the time we're in the kind of the fourth occasion where she loses her temper, the author doesn't even have to show us what she's doing. It takes our view to this storm that is so biblical and treacherous, we can only just imagine, because of how we've been prepared for this every time, this link between her kind of implosion and nature. We can only just imagine what she's been doing. So that, and it's a shame it's on an adult level, The Book Thief, but it's just such a good place to go to get some concrete examples. But of course we see it in Disney, we see it in Pixar, we see it, you know, with, you know, Toy Story 4 and poor little Forky, the lolly little Forky, you know, who doesn't have any kind of self-esteem, and when he's down on his luck and kind of the storm brews in the sky, you know, there's lots of examples of it. Or Monster House, the opening scene of Monster House, where there's a little girl on a trike, and you kind of get this sort of manipulated nursery rhyme sort of singy song, and then she has to ride her trike past what is well known in the community as the haunted house. I mean, just how that opening scene is a really good example of pathetic fallacy. And of course Blue Umbrella is as well, you know, that sort of you know, feelings personified. So for example, if we're at the point now where actually Little Red Riding Hood suddenly realises that Grandma's in danger, she knows there's a problem, we want to start showing this, we want something very dark, very negative, we can begin to build that outside, and we can perhaps continue with this sort of wolf language maybe. Outside, a wild wind howled, you know, and that sort of interface with that sort of word being used in a dual way. Outside, a wild wind howled. A savage. We want to sort of, we want this now, a savage something attacked, the trembling, attacked, the trembling, a savage storm attacked the trembling trees. And these sort of words like savage, howled. I don't know if we could get any more sort of wolfy. Outside, a wild, untamed, milking it probably, that'll do. But that sort of negative, we can move away from this sequence picture writing to this very dynamic high and low writing, much more empathetic, much more engaging, much more high connectivity as we read it. Now, pun. Yeah, we get puns in headlines like that, Goldie locked up. We get puns in non-fiction. Here's another one of my amazingly best-selling picture books, Computer Dad. This is quite a sad story, actually, about how dad and son's life changes because mum leaves. And there's a play on words all through this, and we can see dad isn't coping very well. Mum, framed and frozen, looked on in disappointment. Our curtains are always shut. Searching, searching, searching. Dad seems to always be on the computer. Wishing, wishing, wishing. Everything crashed. Smeary screen, smeary face. Mum's face was gathering dust. Our daytimes merged into night times, operating remotely, feeling lonely. He's always online. Dad, can we have some time? He's got a broken keyboard and I get really bored. And the curtains got used to it. Now just here, there's this sort of play on words of kind of dad's side and the boy's side. Hits, misses, microchips, homemade chips. He gets sick of spam. So do I. But pun's a dangerous sort of line to go down sometimes, and it can go really wrong. You know, in something like a headline, we can really craft it up and it's kind of a one-off device. You know, this is an example. I don't know how much we'd want to invest in it in story, but at this moment, when Little Red Riding Hood starts screaming and the woodcutter comes to her rescue, we could have the woodcutter arrive, and because he is the woodcutter, you know, we could get really excited by tree puns. Or they could be absolutely awful. I mean, they probably are absolutely awful, but the sort of thing we could have, he could burst through the doors and say, "Leave her alone." Yeah, I told you they were naff. He could burst through the door and say, "The root of the forest's problems is you, Mr. Wolf." And there are many more awful tree puns. You know, he would have got there earlier, but he had trouble logging into his email and that sort of thing. So, to be fair, you've got to be really sure that a pun is worth it. Unless you are doing some sort of comedy writing, like a play on words, you know, where you're really sure you can really cheese it up, and then you'll probably be okay. The final lens, my favourite in fact, and it does blow my mind how good kids are at this, personification. And this wonderful piece of personification in Varjak Poor by SF said, "The moon stared down on them, a sullen, one-eyed sentry in the sky." And of course, when we're building personification with kids, what we want to do is gather something like the Fantastics, like dialogue, sight, feel.
Right, you're back on.
Okay, I am so sorry about this tonight. But here, when we're now trying to build personification, and we're at this sort of happily ever after moment, we can take this sentence scaffold, and we'd want to finish on a positive happily ever after moment. So instead of the moon, we might have the sun. The sun, and we could borrow this idea, the sun, and then we want kind of a human word. It's, you know, shone is not quite right to get us into personification. So the sort of thing you might have is the sun smiled down on them, and can you see how SF said's structure is keeping us up? We want to be we're not sullen. We want something positive. The sun smiled down on them. A hopeful, one-eyed, watching. No, I'm going to get rid of watching, but I like the concept of that. A one-eyed story watcher. The sun smiled down on them, a hopeful, one-eyed story watcher. And that really is that power of a sentence scaffold, giving you structures that can really, even if you deviate slightly as a teacher, if you can get a damn good simile, a damn good metaphor, a damn good piece of personification, then it can really prop us up. Now, just to finish, and this is going to be my final point before I buffer on you again, and it's this. What we're sort of beginning to see now as we link and join all of our thinking together is that this idea that when we're working with a plot point and we're trying to drive up to positivity or negativity, what our modelling can feel like now is that we take them under the big wings of our model, and at a particular high or a low point. You can model as many sentences, and I would actually do it in chunks of sense. You know, model a sentence. It's a bit like me, you have a go, come back to me, model, have a go, come back to me, kind of chunked in that way, you know, sentence by sentence, so their working memory doesn't get overloaded. And so here, this would probably be chunked into 3 sections, and I'll explain that more clearly when we look at a lesson in detail. But what we want to do is try not to get a story to flatline, get them to think, are we building something positive or negative? And then once we've got them at that point of interest, we are then showing them very deliberately, look, this sentence is driving through feelings. We're starting there with that feeling adverb. We've got all of this feels like driving up there, +7 positivity. Happily, Little Red Riding Hood skipped through the bright green forest, all of it holding that positivity. The sky was a sapphire, blue, iridescent, glimmering. And then here, this complex structure here with a semicolon and a comma. Her mum had sent her to visit grandma. However, she was sick and needed help. Now the problem with this is it sort of ends on a bit of negativity. I think the sickness, just to keep the tone buoyant, needs to be mentioned later. Her mum had sent her to visit grandma. However, she was less dark, but just lining up perhaps the next thing, she was not following the path. And then that will lead into our next drop. Okay, folks. Sorry for my appalling internet. Mr. C, is there any questions before I leave everybody?
Well, people are talking about lots of things.
Yes.
There are a couple of questions way back. Let me just quickly find them.
Yeah.
I probably can't find an excess. So, oh, hang on a minute. No. That's.
I don't want you to worry about deep in the moment. We are really going to talk about that in a lot of detail. I know this is not a space for worrying anyway, but yeah, we're going to sort out what that actually means. But I really do stand by kind of our main drive is strong dynamic whole class teaching, and that your scaffold itself opens kids up, not to do kind of close procedure copying, just replace that adverb, that actually as long as I can feel positive feelings, as long as I can feel a complex sentence, as long as I can feel that simile, that we have these bigger wings of modelling so that children can begin to show us what they can do with the precision of their language. Yes.
Perhaps instead of looking at questions, perhaps if you could give a summary of what's happening next week, if you want me to go through these with you.
Yeah. No, just give me that laptop so I can read it. Just
can you not read it from here now?
No. Oh, I might be able to do now. You've fronted it up. So next week, what we're going to do now, it's going to feel a bit more like it's a Sunday. You're on your own. It's 7:30. And you're under the gloom of planning a unit. And I am going to talk about the stuff people don't talk about. I'm going to talk about actually how do you build a sequence, how do you make it logical, what does it look and feel like. You know, now we've got, and I hope, you know, what I've done during this week is basically, so a summary of this week. The big message is what is going to prop us up? Okay, actually this is worth saying. When you are teaching English, you need two things to support you. One of them is a structure that helps us understand English more like maths, that we can, as a teacher, open up these compartments for children, and we through worked examples, modelling, stories and non-fiction, they can get a clearer and clearer explicit understanding of what it means to be right through the ideas of writing, the grammar of writing and the techniques of writing. So I can show kids at any one point, look, I'm leaning on high order punctuation here to help me build this. I've got a clause, then a semicolon, then a comma, then a full stop. And this is giving me a shape. That punctuation is giving me a shape to follow to separate out those two clauses, and I've got a really wonderful conjunction in the middle. And so we begin to, and we can say we're here, So I can begin to say to kids, look, I'm working on the ideas of writing, what the scene looks like. I'm then going to introduce some dialogue from the character, and it's going to be quite informal, and then I'm going to build a simile. And we talked earlier in the week how when we work on this structure that props us up, we're always thinking about two things: sentenceness, and we work in chunks of sense, and the other thing we think about all the time is intent. So I am now bringing to this, am I building a positive or negative complex sentence? Am I building a positive or negative simile? So a conclusion of this week is almost, that is like the system that we can then lean on to kind of...
Stop Bluetooth.
Am I back on?
Back on.
Next week, the best way I can describe it is like this: a Lego Star Wars ship. When you want to write a story with kids, it's the equivalent of asking them to build a Millennium Falcon. When you ask them to write a newspaper, it is the equivalent of asking them to build in Lego a starfighter. What I'm going to help you do is, we are trying to get a Star Wars Lego ship at the end of 2 weeks. And they have to do that independently. Honestly, they're 10 years old, and all the ages up to there, and they have to build by themselves a Millennium Falcon. That isn't easy. Next week, I'm going to help you and show you how actually we are going to look at the instruction manual very closely to build the Millennium Falcon in Lego, so that you have absolute clarity on how to build it in the most logical way for children to come out something that is complete, good enough, and very well structured. I hope I haven't lost anybody there with that Star Wars analogy. Hashtag squad goals. I'm sorry for my internet. I love you guys. Have a lovely weekend, and I'll see you on Monday back here at 7:30. Thank you very much. Bye all. Happy Easter.